Hello everyone and welcome back to GTR 24H as we preview the upcoming second round of the 2021 Endurance E-Racing World Championship here on GTR 24H, the FilmVolt 12 Hours of Silverstone. My name is Alex Goldschmidt and alongside me as always Yousuf Bin-Suhayl. Yousuf, how are things? You keeping well?
Yeah, I'm keeping about as well as I can do. We're into February. It's cold. I'm cold. I just want to lie in bed, to be honest.
I think that's like the rest of us. But obviously, at the end of the day, we've got a rather exciting second round. Of course, the home of British motorsport, Silverstone, just over 3.66 miles, will await our four classes this coming week. Yeah. There were a lot of talking points, a lot of dramatic moments, a lot of people out of customary positions, but also a lot to reflect on and what we can expect this coming weekend. What are your thoughts, firstly, after what was, I think, from all of our perspectives, a really, really good season opener back at the 12 Hours of Indianapolis?
I'm going to be honest, I'm kind of glad that we moved it down to a 12-hour race, because if that was a 24-hour race with that same kind of amount of action per hour, my heart would have gone. It would have been over, because there was so much drama that came through for so many, different drivers, for race leaders in various classes, which we'll get onto later in the show. But it was absolutely great, fantastic way to get back into the action, and Indianapolis gave us, a great race to watch.
Now, for those that don't already know, well, Silverstone hosted the first ever Formula One race, official World Championship race in 1950. It actually held the British Grand Prix 2 years earlier. And Yousuf, this is quite a dynamic circuit. Obviously, we go from a very, very traditional American-style circuit at Indianapolis to what is one of the fastest tracks in known motorsport. Average speeds in Formula One over 145 miles an hour. This is going to be a real test of not just how brave you are through the corners, but how you can keep those consistently fast lap times coming in, isn't it?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, you go from something like Indianapolis where you have a lot of 90-degree corners. 90-degree corners and then onto a banking and off the banking. Silverstone, much more dynamic, a much wider variety of corners. You look at some of the slowest corners on the track, for example, Village, heading down into the club chicane at the end of the circuit, and then you have the much more open corners, much higher speed corners, for example, Stowe, Copse, where very little braking is used. And Stowe is one of those corners you're heading uphill, carrying a lot of speed, but because it's uphill, you can just reduce that speed so quickly. You're braking super late, turning in early as well. So much grip on the circuit.
And also, there's going to be a lot of upshift. There's going to be a lot of downshifts here, as you mentioned. Obviously, apart from Maggots, Beckett's, and Chapel, the most iconic three corners known to everyone in motorsport folklore, you've also got Abbey, Farm, and Village. Because you're literally you're coming out of Club Corner. You're absolutely hammering the throttle to the floor. You're shifting up the gears. You're trying to get that run going into Abbey, and that's. With the runoff on the left-hand side, there is a possibility that we could see 2 to 3 cars going in side by side, multi-class action as we have here at GTR 24H. I think that's very much in the realms of possibility, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. I think we're also going to be seeing some people just getting onto the brakes a little bit too late, maybe brakes a bit too hot, running wide as well. And I think Farm is going to be I think it's going to be an overtaking opportunity and a half, not just if you're in different classes, but in the same classes. I mean, I've come from a lot of sim racing in terms of F1 where you can't really overtake there as well, but I feel that when you run through turn 2 in GT cars, you're going to be much more on the limits than you would be in something like an F1 car where you have downforce, and maybe you'll see drivers lifting off a bit just so that they can keep their car to the left on the run into Village, because if they don't, they'll run out wide, they won't be able to carry the momentum through the corner, and I think this means that there are going to be drivers who can carry the speed and just throw their car down the inside.
And obviously, for those wondering about overtaking opportunities, Cops is a perfect overtaking opportunity. You can get the slipstream going through Cops and get the run down going into Maggots. We've seen it in multiple occasions in real-life motorsport where people have gone side by side through Maggots, Beckett's and into Chapel. But that complex is very, very aggressive, Yousuf, especially when you're going through full chat at Maggots. You then have to, as you said, you put on the brakes. Sometimes they may even just lift off, because if the car's front-engined, that's going to allow the car to engine brake. They're going to save the brakes. They're probably going to help save the tyres a little bit, and then you accelerate coming out of Chapel. Then you've got the hanger straight going down into the right-hander at Stowe. That's another, within, what is it, probably about just over a mile, you've got two perfectly good overtaking opportunities. And it is, again, going to be one of those main spots when we get into the real throes of the race at the FilmVolt 12 Hours, where the LMPs are going to be closing up, the hypercars are going to be closing up, the GTEs and the GT3s are going to have to watch their mirrors and their back bumpers all at the same time so as to not to get into any strife. And that is always a key part of endurance racing, as we saw at Indianapolis.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest differences as well when we compare the likes of Indianapolis to Silverstone, and we talk about, the leading cars or any car in a higher up class of lapping someone else, is at Indianapolis, you catch up to a car, you're behind them, sit behind them a corner, you overtake them. It's fairly simple. But if you catch a car going on the run into Maggots, that's a sequence of about 5-6 seconds, really, where you're going to be stuck behind someone and you will not be able to get past. Once you're behind them, if you try to overtake, yes, you might be able to, but it could end in disaster, and I don't think that's going to be the smart play from any of the teams. They're going to have to wait until the very exit of Chapel. We may see some cars trying to run side by side if they are battling for position all the way through Maggots and Beckett's, which could be absolutely phenomenal to witness, and I hope we do see it. But it will be difficult. If you have to get past, you have to do it either before Maggots, when you're lapping a car, or on the exit. And if you're stuck behind, then you're just stuck behind.
So, without further ado, let's have a look back at some of the dramas that unfolded between yourself. Well, dramas that unfolded that you, myself, Austin Puhaka, Ewan O'Leary, as well. We did at times have our venerable producer, Mr. Peter Muncombe, on the broadcast as well, giving us the weather insights. But obviously, things are looking rather interesting. First of all, let's turn to Hyperclass. Of course, PinSim Drillers Esports leading the way. An absolutely dominant performance, despite the fact that Martin Hemmingson was sent to Narnia in the night time. The car flipped over 5 times, but both him and Henry Sinek were absolutely rapid. They were consistently running in the 1 minute 19s. And we personally both think that no one's going to challenge them, even though Omicron Sim Racing didn't actually finish the race. They DNF'd, I think, with 2 hours on the clock remaining, and that gave Satellite Racing the opportunity to snatch second place. But Silverstone, it's McLaren's home turf. It's a fantastic car. It's going to be rapid. Obviously, we know that they have limited settings on traction control. There's no ABS involved with the McLaren Senna GTR. They've got a raft of different tyre compounds they can use. I think PinSim are going to be the ones on top form. They're going to be rapid, but I think we could have an opportunity for Omicron Sim Racing to come back at them, and especially when Thomas Garcia was ultra rapid at Indy.
Yeah, Thomas Garcia was quick, but I think, the biggest thing that I personally noticed with PinSim's Drillers is, I remember at the start of the race we were praising Omicron because we thought PinSim's Drillers, they were going to run away with it. We thought Henry Sinek and Martin Hemmingson, yeah, they've got it in the bag. But after that opening stint, Thomas Garcia, he wasn't that far behind, he was under 20 seconds. In fact, it might have been under 10 seconds, if my memory serves me correctly. And we thought, okay, Omicron, they're doing a good job. Sure, the rest of the team of Omicron weren't quite up to the pace of Thomas Garcia, but they were still quick, Magnus Junerup, Patrick Silvasi, and Josef Suto as well. They were up there. And once PinSim Drillers had made that mistake and we saw the car kind of over the catch fencing and we were wondering how on earth did it get there, after we got over the awe of the physics of the game, and then we thought, wait, hang on a second, PinSim Drillers, they're going to be, pretty much a lap behind Omicron. That's when you then saw Henry Sinek and Martin Hemmingson really showing their pace. And I feel that what we saw at the start of the race was Henrik Sinnek and Martin Hemmingsen just playing it chill, making sure they didn't make any mistakes, making sure they didn't get any cut tracks, etc., etc. But once they pushed, my God, were they absolutely flying. I think they were going probably about half a second to a second a lap quicker than what they were able to do before. So I think it's going to be very difficult for Omicron to challenge them. It's possible if something happens to Pinson Drillers, but I personally don't see it happening.
I think the driver that we have to feel the most sorry for is Thomas Garcia. Both times he gets into the car, the previous driver, whether it was Silvassi or Souto, had an automatic drive-through penalty as designated by race control. So Thomas had to come out of the pits and then instantly, within the next 3 laps, serve a drive-through penalty. And then I think, the bubble had sort of burst. I think Thomas, he was rather upbeat after, everything had happened in qualification on Friday night. But then Saturday just really, really sort of turned a different page of that chapter. But then, you had the likes of Liam Rance, Ryan Nash, Ryan Walker, David Nichols and Marco Rodriguez at Satellite Racing. They were able to pick up second as a result of Omicron. But I think that Omicron now have an opportunity to dust themselves. They've had plenty of time. They've had plenty of team meetings, a lot of practice on the track, getting ready for Silverstone. I think we could see that Omicron could bring the fight to Pinsim Drillers Esports, but I don't think they're going to be enough to one-up them this coming week, if I'm honest.
I think when we spoke as well to Thomas Garcia, I think we spoke to him at the end of qualifying and maybe during the race as well. I think he was very down to earth about the whole situation. He said, this is Pinsim Drillers. We're talking about Henrik Sinnek, Martin Hemmingsen, and I think he was pretty frank with the fact that we aren't going to beat them. Maybe if something happens, we can beat them. And he said that his goal was to kind of close the deficit to them over the course of the season. Get closer and closer to that pace, and then maybe at the end of the season, if they've improved enough, they can have a chance at battling. So I think Omicron, yes, they're going to be disappointed with that third place result, but I think they'll also take the positives from that race and know that, look, Satellite Racing, all they have to do is just finish ahead of them, make sure they don't make any mistakes, and I think their target will be just to take that second place spot.
Indeed, and then we go on to LMP2, an absolutely dominant display by the 117 team of Vargas Sim Racing. Insanely quick, won by over a lap. You had the likes of Marcel Sinsik. You also had David Wisner and Gilly Toman. An absolutely dominant display from them. You had Ramada Motorsport in the number 57, rounding out the second, the runner-up spot, and then of course we had Fair Racing Team rounding out the top 3. But there were some other drivers that we really do, and other teams that we really need to have a look at. I mean, first up, again, we're going to mention, because this is a junior team. I spoke with Nick Newcomb in a recent interview. He said that they're the junior team. It's about bringing the program back. They've had a lot of work going in there. So with the likes of James Juba, who's a recent new signing. With them as well. You had quite a few other drivers turn lower in there as well. Nick was scheduled to drive the LMP2, however he ended up in the GTE. We'll get onto that in a bit, but they had some issues, and Nick said that they're hoping for a bit of a comeback come Silverstone.
Yeah, I think DC Motorsport Club definitely would have wanted a better result than the P9 that they got. I think they have showed pace, and we'll have to see what they can bring through. And I think what we've seen with most of the fields, again, we'll get to GT and GT3 in a bit, but you kind of got those 1-2 teams at the very top, sometimes one team, and then you've got this massive kind of battle of 4 or 5 cars all vying over that same kind of piece of tarmac. Yes, we're talking about endurance racing, so we're talking 10, 15 seconds between them, but at the end of a 12-hour race, that is absolutely no time at all. And I think one of the teams that will be challenging Vargas Sim Racing, yes, I think they're a little bit slower, but I actually think they're closer to Varga than the likes of Omicron are to Pinsim Drillers in the hypercar class. And that is the number 17 of Pinsim Drillers in the LMP2 class, because we know that Marcel Lachinchik and Yuri Toman for Vargas Sim Racing are absolutely phenomenal. But James Duber was very, very quick. He was running on the same lap as Vargas Sim Racing for quite a while, about 30 seconds behind, and it looked like they were in a position that they could challenge if even if Vargas Sim Racing had a little spin and had to rejoin the circuit without any damage. And then issues just came through. They dropped so far down the order, and still they were able to climb up the order and get P5, which all things considered was a really good result.
Yeah, also E-Team Brit, one of the latest crews to actually join GTR 24H. They raced in the hypercar class at the Le Mans finale last year. Had a very good chat with team manager Max Spooner. They are coming with a revised lineup, yet to be confirmed by the team. So it looks to be that they are practicing hard. I am aware of. I mean, I do work with the team anyway, so I do have a. I know that they have been training.
Leak the lineup for us. Leak the lineup for us.
I don't know the lineup myself. I know that Max Spooner will be in the car. Sandro Ballesteros will be in the car again. Obviously, we've got to talk about that issue because Sandro Ballesteros went in after Matt Webb, and then had the HUD issues and the point of view issues from his, because he uses an Oculus Rift.
Yeah.
So he uses VR, and obviously it wasn't changing. They had to have the disconnect. Max has openly said to me, you can see the interview already on the GTR 24H YouTube channel. So if you haven't already, please make sure you like and subscribe and hit the notification bell as well. He said that, you know, the team that was working together, they had Matt Webb, Stuart Ross French, Sandro Ballesteros, and Max. They've been working hard on the Oreca 07 that they're using. You know, some teams are using the Ligiers, and Max said that there was a possibility that if they didn't have that disconnect issue and the system issue with Sandro, they could have been on course for maybe a top 6, top 7 finish. They're hoping. It's home turf. They want to do well. Of course, they want to come back fighting.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we did see when E-Team Brit didn't have their issues, their pace on its own was fairly quick. But one thing I want to feel, you know, on the flip side is even after they got those issues sorted, we still started seeing some other issues coming through, whether that was driver or, you know, out of their own control. But we saw them in the grass at various times, again, having to be in the pit. So we hope that E-Team Brit can keep it clean, can keep it sensible, and can get those consistent laps in, because there is no doubt that they're going to be in the top end of the field.
Yeah. Now we turn to GTE, hotly contested, and it's good to see that the old guard, the Callaway Corvette C7R of the 959 of the likes of Jordan Weeks, Ferris Stanley, who clearly sounds like a NASCAR driver, Philip Klaus, and Craig Baxter, amongst others. You know, they did a fantastic job. They kept really going well. You then had Pescara ADG, the all-Italian crew, in the C8, finishing second. You know, their pace was still very good. A very different configuration, obviously mid-engine rear-wheel drive as opposed to the front-engine rear-wheel drive version of the C7. You then had DIS Sim Racing Lab in the 45 Porsche. You know, they were really pleased to hit the podium. You know, GT3 alumni. The whole team seems to have gotten close to Andy Kirsten's pace. But the team that really, there were a couple of teams that stood out for me in particular here, Yousuf. Yeah. Firstly, was the number 74 Deuces Motorsport Club car. They were second at Le Mans last year. You had the likes of João Barbosa, you had Wojtek Polezny, who took the opening stint, took pole position in the very interesting qualifying that we had. And then they then had an issue. They had Polezny had to go around 2 to 3 laps in order to get into the pit stop box, which they were sharing with Volante Racing. We'll get onto those in just a minute. Polezny had problems getting into the pit box. It was a 30-second turnaround before they managed to hit their marks. Then Nick took over the car, and then coming out of T12, computer freeze. So they then had that, you know, and he said, hopefully things will be better for my computer this time around for Silverstone. But, you know, that was a team that was literally had the carpet dragged from underneath their feet, and they were swept under it with a very stiff broom. And we didn't really sort of see hide nor hair of them. They finished 11th at the end of it. And then we go to Volante. You know, both the 66 and the 67 had dramas, and it was the 67 that really couldn't up the pace. I think we could see signs from Volante. You know, they had a better turn of pace. You had Donat Prodan. You also had what we've now decided to nickname the GTR 24H equivalent of Kimi Räikkönen, of course, Pali Ahonen, who you spoke to on the post-race interviews, Yousuf. I mean, if Valenti can keep out of trouble, because they had incidents, I think Musto was involved in one of their incidents as well. That's another team that could, that was the 54 car that finished P8. If Valenti get the mistakes out of, they've got a lot of mistakes out of the way at Indianapolis. Silverstone, they now can try and turn it around, can't they?
Yeah, and if Valenti Racing can make as many mistakes as syllables that Podi Ahonen says in an interview, they'll be good.
Yeah.
But every time I feel we were in the GTE class and we were seeing an incident, whether it be between two drivers battling for position, whether it be someone unlapping themselves, half the time it felt like it was Valenti. And I'm not putting any blame in either way. I haven't seen the incidents the second time, but they did get penalties for some of those incidents. It caused them to lose laps, and they need to keep their noses clean. There's no doubt that especially the 66 Valenti racing car has the pace. As long as they can keep it clean, they will be in those battles, maybe even up to the top 3.
Yeah, I think other cars that we need to consider here as well, Musto GD Esports, the sister BMW M8, they finished P4 ahead of WOSR iZone Performance, who were third at last year's Le Mans. They were right, those cars were right in the middle of the battle, and they, both teams could have been on course for a podium. Of course, it wasn't to be. We saw a lot of battling in Indianapolis, and with Silverstone, we could see something very, very different. But yeah, I mean, again, also One Move Esports in the 31, they also had the same problem with pit stops, because it was quite a tight pit lane at Indianapolis, and I would imagine we're going to see pretty much the same thing where they're sharing boxes, having to work on their strategy for Silverstone. But that could be another straw that could break the camel's back, if you understand my phrasing there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring up these issues with pit stops, because it's something that I didn't expect we'd be seeing, and it is something that ended up happening, and the teams now have to be aware. The fact that you can do everything right, you can get the perfect strategy, but if you come into the pits with, right at the end of your fuel tank, and there's someone in the pits just before you, and you're sitting, you're waiting for 40 seconds, that can be your win down the drain. So teams are going to have to communicate a lot more, maybe with other teams as well. Maybe say, look, we want to be coming into the pits during this 5-minute window. Can we agree on set time? So you guys have your pit window here, we have our pit window there, so that there's communication, because they are sharing these pit boxes. The other thing is, maybe they have to compromise. Maybe say, look, we've got this 5-minute window where we want to pit. If at the start of that 5-minute window there is nobody in the pits, we take that opportunity to pit. And you do have to kind of bite the bullet and say it's not the ideal strategy, but it could save them a lot of time in a worst possible scenario.
Yeah, because like you say, having those 5-minute windows, they may have to extend it by twice or thrice-fold, maybe up to a maximum of 15 minutes, because if they go, well, yeah, they're already in the pits, we've got another couple of laps worth of fuel on board, not a problem. Or if they've got, they may have to put additional fuel in the car. Okay, that's going to cost them time on pure lap pace, but in terms of an endurance race, you want to eke out that strategy as large as humanly possible. You also want to make sure that if you need to start fuel saving, you're going to have to bite the bullet on that. You're going to also have to look after the tyres if the tyres are getting down to the canvas. You don't want to have dramas where you're out, you're going through corners quite aggressively. You're making up places where the team's like saying, no, just hold back, keep it at 75% throttle on straights. Don't put 100 down because we need to conserve fuel. There's people still in the pits. Yeah. So the team and the driver could be in constant communication, as always. One of the teams that I feel that we could have seen some promise from, and it is the brightest livery of all, Team Viaducton in the 63 Corvette. They didn't finish the race, very, very early retirement, but hopefully we can see them back in good form here at Silverstone. The final category, really, we look at GT3. Firstly, we have to talk about the biggest talking point. With just around about an hour to go, it was the double downshift for Mugen Sim Racing's Zolt Pribek. at turn 2 that cost them the victory. They managed to get back and take third, but it really gave a bit of daylight to Unison Racing, the Russian crew in the 717 Aston Martin, rounding out the Danish Racing League. They took pole, they showed decent one-lap pace, but I think there's a little bit of team depth that needs to be integrated, maybe a bit more working together, and they'll have had that 4-week window between Indianapolis and Silverstone. But there's a lot of promise from that category, even though it is the lowest class category on our grid here at GTR 24H.
Yeah, and I think when we saw the GT3 class, again, this is kind of what we like to describe as almost kind of the amateur entry. Get used to the GT3 class in your first season, then move up to your GTEs, your LMP2s, your hypercars, and we have seen success from the GT3 class before. I mean, DIS won the championship last season. Look how well they're doing in the GTEs against the likes of Musto, Deuces, WOSR. There are some big names in that GTE class, and to be fair to Unison Racing, they were close to Mugen Sim Racing. That final pit stop, they came out right behind them. Sure, they would have fallen back by a bit, but they still would have finished the race within 20 seconds of Mugen. So I think Unison Racing have the pace, and we're talking about a long season as well, a variety of different tracks. You talked about it at the start of the show, Alex, how different Silverstone will be as a track compared to something like Indianapolis. So I don't see there being any reason. I don't think this is necessarily going to be a runaway race for Mugen. I think they are probably the quickest team in the GT3 class. But I think it's close enough that we could be seeing them swapping one way and another. Kind of like, you go back to the likes of 2002, 2007, 2008 in F1, Ferrari and McLaren. It's that kind of close battle that we're seeing.
Yeah, well, that really rounds out the preview here on GTR 24H ahead of the FilmVolt 12 Hours of Silverstone. Don't forget, free practice starts at 8 p.m. Central European time this coming Thursday evening on the 4th of at 8 p.m. on the 4th of February. Thanks for the heads up there, Yousuf. 7 p.m. for qualifying 1 on Friday night before qualifying 2 at 9:30 p.m. Central European time, with the FilmVolt 12 Hours of Silverstone getting underway on Saturday the 6th of February at 12 p.m. Central European time. Yousuf, thank you for your insight as always.
No problem. It's been a pleasure.
So that's it from us. We'll see you this coming week for the FilmVolt 12 Hours of Silverstone.